You're watching METROPOL DEBRIEF on Ganga, and when we sit down, it's time for the conversation. After many, many years, we promulgated the new constitution in 2010, and it required that we change our currency and we demonetize, and we did that among many other reasons. And tonight, we want to find out, was that process a success, or did the 15 billion go to waste? Joining me in studio, Collins Oluoch, a lawyer and an economic analyst. Thank you for making time.
Thank you so much.
Nice to have you on Debrief.
It's been so long.
It's been so long. We've been together on Business AM, not on Debrief.
Yeah, on Business
Welcome
AM.
on Debrief.
Thank you.
So this is the place where we put into context all the big stories and tell people why it matters to them. And with demonetization, Kenyans have been through this process for the last 4 months.
Yeah.
If you had old 1,000 shillings notes somewhere, you had to convert it into the new generation currency.
True.
The deadline came and went, and the Central Bank of Kenya said 97% conversion rate, which is a success. However, because you have a legal background, let's start from the basics. Just break it down very briefly for someone who might not know. What was the constitutional requirement that obligated the government and the Central Bank of Kenya to push through with demonetization?
Thank you so much. One of importance is to note that money is a legal tender. And so as you transact, you are doing that on behalf of the government.
Okay.
And so that's why people cannot mishandle money. They'll be held liable for that. You cannot be seen to tear money, such things. You'll be held liable for that. Under the new constitution, by dint of Article 231, Clause 4, it required that we demonetize and remove the portraits. You remember, the former currencies had portraits of political leaders. And so we were required by the constitution. And I think the framers of the constitution, what they had in their mind was that we have to move from the era of us really glorifying our leaders, because a lot of leaders would come into office and want to leave a legacy that is tangible, and that would be done through the currencies.
Well.
And so there was a speedy need for them to be curbed. And so that's why I think the constitution sought to bring into place demonetization of currencies, and to have us have other symbols or portraits that represent national unity and cohesion. And so that was the premise. To say that the unprecedented move by the CBK governor on 1st June to announce that there is going to be demonetization with immediate effect and launching the new currency notes was really in line with the legal requirement, in as much as we didn't see it coming. Okay. But then we were in court because of someone was a petitioner, that was Okio Mutata, arguing that the symbol of KICC on the new currency was not had a portrait of the founding president,
yes,
Mr. Mzee Jomo Kenyatta. And so for him, he sought to argue that this is not in tandem with what the constitution sought to achieve, because then it said we should walk away from having portraits of leaders. Okay. But then this one had a portrait of leader. Though the matter was already dispensed with, and the court pronounced itself upon that matter, saying that that was not the portrait of the president. They said that is just a monument. So
if I'm getting what you're saying, is the demonetization process was within the confines of the constitution.
Totally.
However, that we've cleared and is out of the way. Was it necessary at this point in time with where the Kenyan economy is?
I mean, for the constitution says, and allow me to argue first constitutional, legally rather. The constitution says that for its, I think under Article 261, implementation of the constitution should be a progressive realization. And that's why I think since 2010, since we had the new constitution, until now, 2019, almost 9 years down the line, is when we saw it fit for us to do that. Legally speaking, it's right. But then speaking economically, under the circumstances that we are working under, I mean, it wasn't right. But then they sought to heal some mischief. To them, it was people who are hoarding money. To them, it was about graft and fraud. So that is what they wanted to do away with it, and to try and curb corruption and try and catch these thieves who are hoarding a lot of money.
I like that you've taken it there, because that is where we want to take this conversation next. Some of the reasons why the government was saying we want to go the demonetization way. One, to clean corruption money or to retrieve corruption money that is in the system. Yeah. Two, to deal with counterfeits, which is something that we'd seen on the news and some viewers might have fallen prey to that.
Sure.
And three, money laundering. So let's start with corruption. Look, we know a third of the national budget, almost, it's a lot of money, 600 billion on an annual basis is lost to corruption. And we say now, to deal with these crooked individuals, let's do away with the old 1,000 shillings note, just like Modi did in India. Is this an economically viable way of stemming out corruption, or it's a short-term measure of dealing with it?
In a long term, it's a viable way. But then, you know, and I feel why in India it was not really a success, but a lot of people have, critics and pundits have argued that it was a success. But for me, it wasn't. It's because Modi gave a deadline of 4 hours by midnight. I mean, in Germany, in Australia, in other countries where this has been successful, it has been a progressive realization. Yeah. There's no need for us to have a deadline of 4 months to catch these people. At the end of the day, I mean, we've not caught them. You see, why corruption is really embedded on cash is because you cannot really trace cash. But for money, or money wiring and doing all that, mobile banking and all that, it's easy for you to track and say there's a trail like this leading to someone's account. But you know, cash is so hard. That's why a lot of people are holding cash in their houses. But then, you know what CBK did not really envisage in doing all this campaign is what would have happened. Are these guys really going to bring the money? Are there other ways that these guys can use to beat around the system? Are there loopholes?
Was there actually corruption money in the system? We know it's been proved that it gets stolen. Yeah. However, was it in the system? Because we haven't seen it being returned.
It has not been returned, but maybe it has been returned in a legal way. For me, I think the illegal money got to the system back in a legal manner. And that's one thing that CBK will keep hiding their face, but they'll not face the reality. But that's the reality. I mean, and I equally don't think this was really a success. Because if they're saying, and I remember there's a time the CBK governor was giving a press address, and they said, so far it's so successful. And if it's successful, then we should have seen people going to court. We should have seen them, we should have seen the DPP and the DCI after individuals who've returned huge sums of money, but that did not happen.
However, just to play devil's advocate, I was there during the press conference and he said 15 bank accounts, 15 fraudulent transactions were kind of flagged, and the matter was with the DCI and the DPP.
How long will that take for us to see that in court?
Good question. Good question. How long will that take? Well, we'll just have to wait and see, because from what he said is that it's more like an ongoing process. However, there was also the matter of counterfeit and money laundering. Now, particularly counterfeit, the 1,000 shillings note, in the recent past, you couldn't distinguish which one is the real and which one is the fake. The market there was an influx of fake notes in the market. Do you think by wiping out those old notes and bringing in new ones, you've bought yourself time to kind of figure out what is going on and why it is so easy to counterfeit the 1,000 shillings note?
I like it that for them, an issue was about counterfeit. But even in the new currencies, you don't see something distinct that makes it hard for someone to counterfeit the currencies. Now they're talking about feel, touch, turn. I mean, but it's still the same thing.
Like even the old note you could hold like this and look for the lion.
I mean, yeah. So people who are doing the business of doing counterfeit business can still do that, unless we had a different material used in the new currencies. And I was saying, if we used not paper that we've used now, if we could have used polymer, like what is used in UK and all that.
Yeah.
In the European Union. I mean, it's so hard for you to have a counterfeit of that. But then instead of investing in that, they invested in other things of touch, feel, and turn.
Do you think if we are to definitely deal with some of these things, then maybe we should focus towards a digital economy and cashless transaction?
Totally. And you know why people are yet to really embrace cashless transaction is because they want to enjoy that feel. You know, money gives you clout. I mean, I won't feel so much proud if I have money on my M-Pesa as compared to me having cash, hard cash. You know, there's that entitlement that someone feels when they're holding money. Yeah. And even when someone makes makes payment to you on check and gives you cash, I mean, you'd really feel better when you're given cash because of that entitlement that comes with holding hard cash. And so it will be so hard for us really to move to that space of cashlessness or digital banking and all that. But that should be the process. We should be headed towards there with digitization and the technology transformation. I mean, that's where we should be heading. But that will really aid us with regards to tackling corruption.
Now, among the good things from the demonetization process is they said 97% conversion rate. However, from where you sit, what are some of the loopholes that we've seen throughout this whole process that might derail its long-term goal?
You see, when this was launched, I think after 3 weeks, a lot of banks were coming out saying that they don't have the new currencies in their ATMs. And I mean, you cannot be talking about demonetization without thinking of remonetization.
Yes.
Remonetization is very vital as you're talking about demonetization. And I don't think they really encapsulated that when they were rolling out the demonetization. Because then we could not have situations where banks are running out of the new currencies. And then I remember a time that CBK governor came out and said it was a test to try and see how it's being received in the market. I mean, you don't do that. If you're trying to curb corruption, have all the intention to do that. Don't come out and say it was really trying to look how deep this ocean is and trying to see how is it received well. I mean, be intentional about whatever thing you're doing. And so for me, the biggest hindrance, and it will affect us long term, is remonetization. It was not progressive, the remonetization. And now they're saying they've rolled out, I think, 149.
149. Previously in the market, there were about 217 million pieces. 209 were returned. Now you've rolled out 147. So there's a big deficit of about 60 million pieces.
Totally. And so I'm sure in the fullness of time, that is now going to hit us really. The 60%, the 60 million deficit. We're now going to see it now really trickling down. Yeah.
And maybe it is trickling down because you speak to people, they're telling you there's no money in the economy, there's no circulation.
You know, money is a medium of exchange. It's a store of, it's a value of a storage, and it's equally a unit of accounts. These three arms of money should really work together, and that's why the aspect of remonetization is in play. That when you're saying it's a medium of a currency, then this should be going in tandem with it being a storage, a medium of storage. That you're not just using it as a medium of exchange without thinking about the storage. Yeah, and that is what is going to affect us because we've invested in one and forgotten the other arm.
So how do they restore a state of normalcy? Because you have to fill in that deficit if you want the economy to go back to operating to the way it was.
We still have the other old generation currencies still in place. Yeah, for me, I don't think we need a rush to give deadlines for those ones equally. Let them just be on the market. And I think a lot of people maybe transformed their 1,000 notes into 500 shillings because they are still legal. And so that's why we saw these people who were aimed at when this was being rolled out, not being out there. Yeah.
So it's a process that will take time.
Yeah,
allow the older currencies to fade out naturally. Do not pull them out to maintain a state of balance.
A funny thing is that in other countries, even in Germany, a currency that was withdrawn long ago is still in use. And all you just need to do is just to queue on the banks and have it transformed. But now here, 1,000 shillings note is not accepted anywhere anymore, because in a bid we wanted to curb corruption. And I don't know why there was that urgency and that strict timeline. And I thought there's a day I was speaking and I said maybe they would extend the deadline because of us being Kenyans. A lot of people would not have done that even during the deadline. But then maybe one thing that the CBK governor will be boasting about is they didn't extend the deadline and they had 97%. Yeah.
Very briefly, we'll be crossing over to abide by Mbitha Mwema, but I like what you said, that why the rush? Because if it's your national currency, then you can say this is the set time, maybe for X amount of transactions, ensure that you've done it by this time around. And then for what is left, there's this due procedure. You can go to the central bank and change your money in a very procedural way.
I think we were so much overzealous with regards to fighting corruption, and we didn't really think through it. I mean, we just came out with knee-jerk reactions to see maybe through this we can be able to curb corruption and leave a legacy for ourselves. But really, I think it's going to bite us in the fullness of time because I don't see results from that. And the funny thing is that equally, a lot of people assume the role of CBK governor. A lot of corporates, including Safaricom, were giving ultimatums to their customers and saying, for us as from 24th, we think this currency will not be allowed. For us, and the CBK governor failed us as a country, not pronouncing himself of that. And he said, I don't think it's illegal or not, or legal for a state to say that. I mean, totally it was illegal, because then if a body corporate like Safaricom could come out and say to its customers that we have a deadline of 26th for the new currencies, for the old generation currencies to be accepted with in our business, then they could equally extend the deadline. If you can bring it forth, then you can equally extend it, and totally that is illegal. And so having the CBK governor saying, I don't know whether it's legal or illegal, it was totally foolhardy, and him not being able to reaffirm his position, and which is underpinned in the Constitution.
Now, a lot has been said about this process, whether it was a success or not, and whether it had any economic implications or not. Let's cross over to Mbitha and hear what she had to say. Well, there you have it. There'll be a cash crunch in the short term, and smaller businesses are the ones that are bound to suffer. What do you have to say to that?
I totally agree. And that's what I've said when I was talking about medium of exchange and equally a medium of storage. Because of that gap, I mean, a lot of people, and I liked what Mbida said, that a lot of people now will run and acquire stock to keep, because you don't know how long you're going to even enjoy the money that you have, or how long you're going to have the money.
But so why don't you just take it to the bank? Maybe those are the people that the CBK was trying to nab, and they found ways of beating the system.
Why should I go to the bank to be arrested for money that maybe I worked for it? And so people will have to ask me a lot of questions. I mean, you know, I was wondering whether places like Kapedo had the privilege of having the new currencies. I mean, we have other far-flung areas in this country where it's so hard for you to even have an ATM existing there, whether they've had the privilege. And I saw yesterday on the dailies, there's someone, I think in Siaya County, who had the old currencies notes, and they don't know what to do with them now anymore. I mean, so what do you tell such people who had investments and they've not been able to connect with what is happening in the country? And I know in law we say ignorance is not defense, but really, ignorance is not defense, but there was lack of public participation and there was lack of access to information for everyone with regards to the demonetization process.
But the CBK governor said they did a lot of media sensitization, they did road shows, they traveled to all parts of the country, they sat in barazas, there were flyers everywhere, and they went to as many media stations as possible, particularly vernacular ones.
The Constitution says public participation is an ongoing process, and I've forgotten the name of the term, which says that the one who is mostly affected should be mostly consulted.
Okay.
Before coming up with the new currencies, there should have been public participation, involving people in, and you know, the new constitution is the people are supreme in the new constitution. There's a sovereignty of the people, supremacy of the people, supremacy of the constitution and sovereignty of the people. It's the people who voted for the new constitution. And so if they decided that we want to do away with political figures and portraits on the currencies, then involve us in those portraits that we want to bring that stand for national unity and cohesion. And that's why you had a problem with people saying the monument at KICC reflects the portrait of the founding president. I mean, if there was public participation and involving people through coming up with those portraits, and I think the fear maybe would be people would have envisaged how the money, preempted how the money would look like and go ahead and counterfeited them. I mean, that's neither here nor there. But really, according to what the Constitution says, people should have been involved at even that stage of coming up with the new currencies. And I think that was not done.
Mbida equally says, because of the liquidity crunch, people will not necessarily borrow from banks. As it is, banks are not even lending to anybody. We saw members of parliament wanted the interest rate caps to stay. The president disagrees with them. So there's going to be still that kind of standstill. People will resort to digital lending. And we know that's not the very best place to borrow, because the interest rates are just way over the roof and there are so many hidden costs. Where do we go from here, particularly with this situation now a possibility? And
the interests are illegal. You need to add that for the money borrowing lending apps. And that's what I've said, really. Since the interest rate was adopted, I mean, SMEs have really struggled. Banks are not giving money anymore to SMEs. And so the common mwananchi is really struggling to even acquire loans from banks, because now banks are only doing, they're only doing business with government or the big boys in that corporate sector. And so with this with these new developments, I mean, I see a lot of SMEs and a lot of individuals now turning to the only place that they can get money easily, but they don't really think about the effect that they're getting money at because of the kind of interest rate. And I've said it's illegal because I think there's a time the CBK governor came out and equally KRA came out to speak about what is happening with and they needed to streamline. They said they spoke about a time where they'll come and streamline the interest rates that are being given out by the lending companies, because they are not in tandem with what CBK has given out. But then this is something that we should have seen it coming, really, for us to struggle as SMEs and small wananchi to struggle with regards to acquiring loan or even acquiring money. Something that should have
and just staying with the banks just for a few seconds, the president rejected the bill. So where does Parliament go from here? Because if you don't, the banks are saying, if you don't revise interest rates, will not lend to private sector, will not lend to SMEs, because the risk is way too high. We'd rather lend to government at a lower risk and lower interest rate. So that means there's no liquidity in the market, and it's the market that suffers. So where does Parliament go from here with regards to the law and with regards to the economy?
And I agree with where the parliament, with where the backdrop and the background of parliament. I mean, I share the same sentiments. We need to reduce this. I don't know who the president is acting on behalf of, but really, if it was a bill that needed the president to assent, and this was not a bill that this just needed a review by the president. If it was a bill that needed the president to assent and the president failed to do so and returns it back to parliament with a memoranda, then it's incumbent upon parliament to include the memoranda in the new bill and take it back. But if that fails to happen if now parliament has approved it and then they are taking it to president and president does not assent within 14 days, if 14 days lapse, it becomes law effective, like what happened to the security bill, the security laws that happened, I think 6 years ago or something like that. Yeah, if a bill has already been passed by parliament, but it's within the precincts of the president and he has not acted on it within 14 days, then it comes into force.
Okay.
But now what happens now is parliament has to reconsider another way of beating around this. But then I don't think they can, it's a political environment that you're existing in. I mean, it's so easy for the president to call these people and whip them into order.
Yeah.
And so I don't see a way out for SMEs and a way out for common wananchi. At the end of the day, I don't think there's that intentionality really in parliament to backdate what they did or rewrite the wrongs that they did again. Yeah.
Now, as we almost come to a close of this conversation, we've demonetized the new currencies here, and it's here to stay. However, the challenges of corruption, counterfeit, money laundering stay with us. Where do we go from here? Because we can't keep demonetizing every 10 years or every 20 years.
Yeah, sure. I mean, with regards to now long term of where we go, with regards to fight of corruption, it's another totally different ballgame. And I don't think it's within CBK to try and decipher how can we really tackle corruption. In as much as it's a multi-sectoral approach and a multifaceted, everyone needs to be involved, it's not within CBK to think of coming up with measures of fighting corruption. If anything, I see as in the next time, if another president comes in and thinks, okay, there's corruption and how to curb this is through demonetization, I think we're still going to have another demonetization. But really empowering judiciary, empowering arms of government and just separation of powers, just being rule of law totally. In rule of law, we get to curb corruption. But then if you stifle parliament, if you stifle judiciary, the DCI and the DPP are not empowered. If they do something, we think it's political witch-hunt. And equally, citizens are not angry. Kenyans are not angry enough to that
you
point.
Think so?
Totally. We are not angry enough to even realize what a billion can do. We've not even really, and I think one day you need to do an explainer to explain to people really what can a billion do. For people now to understand really, if someone steals 1 billion, I don't have to sing "It's my leader" and being rallied on the streets because I've been given 100 shillings from their billion that was mine rightfully, that have been given 100 shillings to now go and riot because my person has been taken to court. I mean, if Kenyans were angry enough, you'd see public arrests happening. You'd see people taking these people to court. And equally, there needs to be a reform in the judiciary system to say that why do we have other cases that are really dealt with so easily? Why is the presidential petition done with after 14 days?
Yes.
Why don't we have such a mechanism where we say for matters corruption, let them be dealt with fast? And if people are going to, if you've been named in matters corruption, you should step aside if you're holding office. What is happening in Kiambu, for instance? You'll see if the governor there is to hold a rally, it will be so full and people will be chanting his name, oblivious of what is done, whether they are claims or whether they are truths. I mean, oblivious of that. You'd see people are not angry enough yet to be out there and condemning leaders who are in graft. But if anything, nowadays, if you're found guilty of corruption, it's really a requirement for you to be a leader in this country. We've forgotten about the age requirement, the integrity requirement. Now it's corruption.
How about money laundering?
I mean, I think CBK knows and KRA knows people who are doing money laundering in this country, and they watch them. And even the guys who are hoarding money, they are known. It's not even with their demonetization, they are demonetizing currencies. I mean, there was talk everywhere on social media whom this was being aimed at. And I saw a lot of other leaders coming out and saying, I'm being accused of hoarding money in Komarok. There was one who was saying that, I won't mention. I was being accused of hoarding money in Komarok. It's not true. And all those sentiments. I mean, if it's, in court, there's something called, in law, there's something called judicial notice. And so you don't have to be labor with providing evidence on a matter. The court just has to take judicial notice that this has happened. And so I think we as citizens and KRA and other arms of government really need to take judicial notice of the people who are doing money laundering and go after them. Yeah. But if they're not going to be intentional and honest about it, we'll still keep beating around the bush, and demonetization will not really help us.
Finally, what does the whole demonetization process mean for the Kenyan economy?
It was, sorry?
What does it mean for the Kenyan economy now as we stand? The old notes are gone, the new notes are here. What does it mean for the Kenyan economy as we stand, or what has it done to the Kenyan economy?
If it has done anything, it's to make things worse for us. And I think we are still, even you've seen how we are trading. I mean, there's no improvement whatsoever. There is a cash crunch at the moment. People are not getting money. And so if anything, I think tougher times are ahead of us because of lack of currency. And if CBK does not come out with a plan on how they're going to, don't let the money into the currency like what happened in Zimbabwe. We're going to have a hyperinflation. Don't do that. Just a progressive demonetization process. There's no rush for this. I mean, this is our country. This is our legal tender. There's no rush for this. So I don't know where they are taking the money for us to have such a short timelines. And I'm not talking like this because I know someone knows hidden money. I mean, but it
well, you tell us.
It should be a progressive realization, really. There should not be hurry for it. If you're going to look for people who are stealing money and corruption, I mean, use another mechanism of doing that. Don't use demonetization, because there are people who are hurting from this.
So what should be the whole essence of a demonetization process, or why should a country demonetize? Very briefly, in 30 seconds.
Legally. If it's a legal requirement, if people have decided that we need to demonetize, do that. And equally, if you have a lot of money in the market and you want to control that, then you can demonetize. Yeah, but we did not have that situation of having a lot of money in the market.
So do it for the right reasons, not for political reasons or maybe for a witch hunt reason.
It was just purely gimmick.
Was it purely games and gimmicks, so you think demonetization had a purpose and it has achieved it? Talk to us, #METROPOL DEBRIEF @Ondiroganga. We'll see you after the break for Social Watch.